What is going on, Comic Fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by two special guests. We've got Doc and Jen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for
Thanks for
having us.
having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is fun. This is going to be a fun interview and conversation because I typically have comic book creators on, and we're talking toys and we're talking Nancy Drew today. So I'm excited.
Awesome.
So let's first and foremost, let's kind of just for someone's popping on going, whoa, you're not talking about comic books. What are we talking about? So you guys are in the midst of a Kickstarter right now. What's the pitch for the Kickstarter?
Well, Nancy Drew, she's the original Girl Detective. She first came on the scene in 1930. She's been a detective for over 90 years, longer than Batman. She has had 3 different television series over the decades. She's had 9 different feature films, hundreds and hundreds of novels, graphic novels. It been all across the world, international sleuth. And she's never had an action figure, never once. And so I started a little indie toy company with my buddy Gavin called Wandering Planet Toys, and we decided we wanted to fix that. So we reached out to Jenn Fisher, who's here with us, president of the Nancy Drew fan club, someone I've known for years, but who helped us get in touch with Simon and Schuster, who helped us get in touch with basically everyone we needed to make this happen. And then we sat down and we started Toy Line based on the original Girl Detective, Nancy Drew. It's on Kickstarter right now. It's fully funded, but we've got a stretch goal up and we're going hard.
It's awesome. So Jen, you got brought on because of you are the president of the Nancy Drew fan club. Why Nancy Drew? I want to know a little bit about that. Why?
So why did I get involved with Nancy Drew?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I read the books as a kid. I don't know if you read like Hardy Boys or
See,
any
I
of those
was
kind of books.
my knowledge of
Yeah.
Nancy Drew was because whenever she'd appear with the Hardy Boys, I had all the Hardy Boy
Yeah,
books.
cool. Okay. So I mean, they were fun mysteries, they were
Yeah.
entertaining, and I just loved them as a kid. And I guess I got kind of down this rabbit hole that I've been on because I kept my childhood books, but I kind of went off to college. I went off to law school. But I was in an antique store and I discovered a vintage Nancy Drew from the 1930s. And I was reading these mostly in the 80s and 90s. So I didn't know anything about like what is this thing from the 30s? I didn't know she existed back that far. So that kind of got me interested in like the history behind, the series and the people that created her and learning about all the different books and the formats and how she changed over the years. And then I started meeting all these fans and collectors, and we just kind of formed this group we called Nancy Drew Sleuths. And over 20 years ago, we started having, annual conventions and getting together. And, it's just been a lot of fun.
So how excited then were you when Gavin and Doc came and were like, we want to do a Nancy Drew figure?
I was really excited. Like Doc said, I'd known him for quite a while, and like he said, there's never been an action figure, so that was exciting. I had Star Wars action figures in the 80s, and I loved them. I still have them today. So just thinking of Nancy Drew in that format, something very tangible and like stepping right off the covers, and something that people can play with or display or whatever they want to do with it. It's pretty cool. So I really liked the idea.
Yeah. So Doc, you mentioned before that 90 years of doing detective stuff and has never had an action figure. Like, at what point were you just like, we've got to do a Nancy Drew action figure?
I mean, we at Wandering Planet Toys, our first toy line was based on the 1967 TV show The Prisoner. Classic British TV show, just filled with paranoia and bizarre visuals, and it did really well on Kickstarter. And so we were just thinking, like, what should our second line be? And we wanted to. The thing about The Prisoner is, if the show had been around since 1967, yet it had never had action figures, and we sort of loved that. We loved being in a place where we were making the toys that should have happened that never did.
Mm-hmm.
And we were brainstorming that when Nancy Drew hit us. My wife's a big collector, and she had a shelf of the books in our living room, and I just started taking down the covers, and just the nostalgia overwhelmed me from the 80s. I mean, I think that any kid who spent any time in a library or in a bookstore in the 80s would remember some of these covers if you showed them to them,
Yeah.
like Secret of the Old Clock, or Hidden Staircase. Like they're just so iconic and so bold. And so the it suddenly struck us, Gavin and I, these have never been figures. There's never been a Nancy Drew action figure, and that's what got us excited. Like we can fill the gap.
That's so cool. And I want to get more into the Nancy Drew aspect of the action figures in a second, but I gotta know, because I checked out the previous campaign of The Prisoner and how you guys do everything. Where was your idea and basis for your action figure line of like, these are the style of action figures we want to create?
Well, here's the thing. We, Gavin and I are both just big toy collectors now. We still have, like Jenn, we still have our action figures from the heyday of action figures in the 80s. And I fell in love with the TV show The Prisoner as a kid in the 80s. Like, it played on my PBS station after Doctor Who in Atlanta, Georgia Public Broadcasting, GPBS. And those would, if there had been toys when I was watching The Prisoner, they would have been 5-point articulated Kenner style action figures. They would have been that nostalgic 80s kind of action figure. And so that's like a toy company called Super 7 has had tremendous success with what they call reaction figures, which are Kenner style 5-point articulated. And we said, well, what we want to do is create the figures we would have had if we had these figures when we were watching the show as kids. And that's the same with Nancy Drew. I mean, Nancy Drew's been around since the 30s, but Gavin and I were, as children of the 80s, found the books in the 80s, and the sort of 60s covers were the ones that we were seeing in the 80s. And it was like, if we had had the toys at the time, this is what the toy would be: kind of retro Kenner style 5-point Star Wars-esque action figure.
Yeah. So when you guys came up with this idea line, you reached out to Jenn. Jenn, how much of the consulting were you on this part of, picking out the covers, like which ones to do, which figure, like how involved were you in this process?
Well, I started out by getting them in touch with Simon and Schuster so they could deal with all of those issues.
Yeah.
And then I have kind of offshoot of my website is a page where I have all the cover art by decade, so you can see how Nancy changed through the years and look at all the covers. So I sent them a link to that so they could really see all these different covers. And I know they looked at that. He looked at some of his wife's books, and they kind of made decisions that way. I provided feedback when they needed it or had a question. I wrote some of the copy for the card backs. That'll be the card back figures. So I got to do little things like that. And then when they decided to do the novella, which I know we'll probably get to in a little bit, they needed an artist to illustrate that. And so all of the classic, like the first 56 books, illustrators had passed on, but at the very beginning of the paperbacks, which continued on from 56 to 57 on with a different publisher, they had an artist named Ruth Sanderson. And she is still illustrating and still amazing and does really great work. And so I put them in touch with her, which was a thrill, because I know Nancy fans really love Ruth's art from those early Nancy Drew paperbacks that were coming out in 79 and the 80s. And so that almost fits perfectly, because that's kind of our frame of reference. We grew up in the 80s, and that's kind of our style of Nancy in a way, so that we grew up with. So yeah, those are some of the things I got to do, which was pretty cool.
Nice.
Jenn's being humble. She's absolutely been invaluable. Like, we could not have gotten the level of detail we wanted out of these figures without her. So
yeah.
Well, it's been so much fun to be able to just see how this works behind the scenes, and what they go through to create these figures, and the campaign, and getting it out to the fans, and helping publicize it, and getting all the fans excited. So I've just been having a nice little adventure in this process.
And by the way, she is the Nancy Drew expert in the world. I mean, like, when we're not the first people to hire her to consult on Nancy Drew projects. She's consulted for Hollywood projects. She's lectured about Nancy Drew all over the world. So Like this is the person to talk to in the world.
Yeah, that's so cool. And what I love is, from both aspects of, Doc, you talking about having these toys as a child, having these shows and things that you loved as a child, and Jen, your love for Nancy Drew as growing up as a child. Like that's how I got back in my collecting of comics, right? Finding something that I loved that brought me joy as a kid, and then getting to say, "Oh, I have money now as an adult. I can buy this stuff." So, like,
Yeah.
it's cool though, and you guys are being able to take something that you both loved and bringing it to life in a really cool way. I got to ask you about the Kickstarter a little bit. What are like I've been on the Kickstarter page, saw the video and stuff, but you guys have a lot of different tiers. Can we talk about some of those tiers that you have that people can support still?
Yeah, absolutely. So what one thing that I can't claim it was my idea. It was either Jen or Gavin's, I'm not sure. But one thing about the packaging is that we have obviously, if you're a hardcore action figure collector, sometimes you want that typical card pack with a blister and you're going to
Yes.
display it with other carded figures. We have those carded figures using the book covers, and they look great. But also we have what we're calling the secret book packaging. So what it is the action figure package looks like a book itself. And then you open the book, and instead of pages, the figure is inside. And it's inside in a plastic tray that's resealable. So you can take the figure out, pose it, photograph it, play with it, put it back in, seal it up. And then you could hide that, but you could stick that book on your bookshelf with your other Nancy Drew books, with all your other books. And it's kind of like a little clue of an action figure right there on your bookcase. And so we've got the individual, we offer 4 different figures in these secret book packages. They're based on classic Nancy Drew stories. We did the ones that you would, the Secret of the Old Clock, which is the first Nancy Drew book. It's got the most iconic cover. We're doing that figure in a secret book pack. We also, on other tiers, we have some 2 figure packs, and
Okay.
these we got to have a lot of fun with. Because there's a sort of a more obscure, lesser known Nancy Drew title called The Crooked Banister, which is just a weird freaking book. Like Nancy Drew, like there's a con man has gone missing, and Nancy Drew has to like break into his house to try to find him. Straight up B&E, I mean felony charges. To do it, she has to cross a moat of fire. And then when she gets to the house, it's like got trap doors. It's got like staircases that go into. No, there you go.
So
It's
good.
an actual crooked banister, like as you see on that cover. And inside, she finds a robot, like this retro style robot that is programmed by tapes, and it tries to crush her to death. And it is such a weird moment in Nancy Drew history that we decided to preserve that moment with a 2-box set that is Nancy from the cover, this kind of unique purple outfit that she's not really in anywhere else, and a retro robot who's ready to crush the life out of her, for breaking and entering. So the other 2-pack set got based on a Mystery of the Lilac Inn, which I think is the 4th book. But it's weird because on the cover, it looks like Nancy as a ghost with a different black-haired girl looking at Nancy's ghost. But what's actually happening is it is there we go. That's it right there. Jen's
Yeah.
holding. It is a villain posing as a ghost that is disguised to look like Nancy, and Nancy in a black wig in order to be in disguise to look for the ghost. And so we did a 2-pack set of the ghost and Nancy, and it's a lot of fun because it's a weird little moment.
Yeah. I love it. It's so cool of, finding something unique and making it special of like this is what I appreciate too is you're cognizant of other collectors of how people want. Like you might want just the classic on a card, but then you're like, but you know what? We also got this really cool thing where you can just have them hidden in your bookshelf. Like that's so, and it's like a mystery detective thing. Like it's
and you could get a
cool.
bundle there's a tier that's a bundle that offers you both. So, plenty of options.
Yeah.
We even Jen mentioned the novella.
Yeah.
Like you know, for Nancy Drew fans, those original 56 books really kind of the core or the canon of Nancy Drew. But Nancy Drew's been in publication continuously since the 1930s, and new Nancy Drew books come out all the time. But they're like sort of modernized, therefore, even younger readers, they are like they're not exactly the those classic books, right? And so Simon and Schuster, they're so cool, they gave us permission as a Kickstarter exclusive. You're not going to be able to get it in bookstores. You're not going to be able to get it anywhere. We're going to get a current Carolyn Keene to write a new Nancy Drew mystery story in the tradition, in the classic original 56 style, one that you could sort of put on your bookshelf right with those original 56. And that's, you only get that through this Kickstarter.
Wow. So you kind of hinted at it a little bit. How did this all come about, of the idea of let's also, on top of doing the action figures, let's see if we can get a new book?
It was it may have come from Jen, or it may have come from Gavin. It wasn't my idea. It was a good idea, so it didn't come from me.
Listen,
But
Gavin's not here, so you can take
I meant to say it's my idea, and Gavin thought of nothing.
It was a genius idea, Doc.
No, but it was something we dreamed up as like, oh, because we're, you know, Kickstarter is so great about indie comics, it's so great about indie publishing, and like Nancy Drew collectors are going to love these action figures, but they also just love the stories. They know the stories. And so we just thought, oh wow, wouldn't it be great if we could do a new story, but in the classic style? But we never thought Simon and Schuster would go for it, because their job is they publish books. And why would they give us, you know, certainly they'll give us the license to do toys off the books, but why would they let us publish a book, you know, be their competitor in a certain sense? Though it's not, I mean, they're our partner, but
Right.
I'm saying, you know, they published the Nancy Drew books. Why they let us publish a Nancy Drew book? But they did. You know, as long as it is unique as a Kickstarter, you can, you know, incentive. You know, we're not going to be able to sell it in bookstores or
Right.
sell it online or in any other way. But as an incentive, they said you go for it, because they're not really working in that classic space right now. They're working in a more contemporary space, Nancy.
That's so cool. So how was the process then of getting the team to collaborate to do the book then?
I mean, it couldn't have been smoother, really. Like Simon Schuster said yes, but they wanted to be their Carolyn Keene, their author. So just for those who might not know, the author of the Nancy Drew books since 1930 has been Carolyn Keene, who is a ghostwriter, a group name that the ghostwriters of all the Nancy Drew books have always used. And so there are Carolyn Keens working today, and we're using one of the current Carolyn Keens. But the editors, you know, as long as we were using their writers, they were comfortable. They've been like the approval process. They've been such great partners all the way through the line, and so supportive.
So it kind of worked out of you didn't have as many hoops to jump through, because once they said yes, they're like, we're gonna create the book, have one of our people who we trust and know will handle the property the way it needs to be handled, that we don't have to be concerned about it.
Well, I mean, they do approvals at every stage. I mean, they approve every figure, every package, the cover for the novella. I mean, even the copy for the Kickstarter you know, campaign, they approved and gave notes on. But their notes are always constructive and helpful.
Yeah.
Like they're fast to return responses. Like they treat us like they really care about this project, which is awesome.
Yeah.
You know, because licensors aren't always that way. You know, that's like, send me my royalties, and then, you know, you kind of have to fight them on everything. But Simon Schuster's been amazing.
That's got to be cool too. You know, as fans, and Jen, I know you, sounds like you've been working with people with Nancy Drew stuff for a long time. But like, it's got to be cool though, as just like from a fan base, to be like, to have a company that's like, that understands what the fans want, and are like, if you want to do it, we'll help. Sure, we'll not make it hard for you. Like that's got to be neat.
Yeah, they've always been great to work with. I mean, they've been very supportive of, like, when we're having a convention or we're doing merchandise. or some of the other stuff that we've been doing. And so, yeah, I've always been excited to work with them. They've just been really, I guess, appreciative that we're still kind of keeping, because part of the whole Nancy Drew popularity has always been sort of grassroots, and that the fans and different generations that just keep passing these down to the new ones. And we kind of keep the name out there and keep all the excitement going for all the new stuff and also for the vintage. And so, yeah, so they've been great.
Yeah.
And one thing is, like, I have to give them props at Simon and Schuster, because there's a Nancy Drew TV show currently on air with the CW, which is a kind of a contemporary supernatural kind of spin on Nancy Drew. And I think a lot of companies would say, hey, that's Nancy Drew now. Like, get on board. Like, but Simon and Schuster is completely comfortable with the idea that the CW are making their show. We're making our retro figures. Like, the publishing arm is publishing sort of younger books that, like, they're comfortable with the idea that Nancy Drew can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and that's really refreshing.
Yeah, I think it's smart. Like, from a comic standpoint of, you can have, in my world of, you can have your 66 Batman, the campy, goofy Batman. You can have your dark, gritty Batman, and they can both properties can exist in the same world, because as a fan you like them, but you might gravitate towards one more, right? Like, you might gravitate just more towards the older books, but it still is cool to have that they can all still exist in the same world.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. So I gotta ask then of, do you have, I get it, these are like your kids, right? Like, you don't have a favorite, but do you have like a favorite of one of the books that you're like, oh, this came out really well, the figure with the packaging and stuff?
Well, I will tell you, well, probably that robot is going to crush the life out of Nancy, probably my personal favorite. But I will tell you this: we've got this. It delights me to no end. We have got a figure based on the Clue the Dancing Puppet, which is this it's one of the creepier ones. And she's staying in this old barn that some actors have turned into a theater, and she in the night, a marionette shows up, like, in the yard. This faceless ballerina marionette shows up in the yard, and when she runs out to try to catch it, it's gone, and it doesn't seem to have a puppet master, right? Like, it's just like this haunting faceless puppet. And we hit on the idea of doing a figure based on that. It was like, well, we can't without using the puppet as an accessory, so we got to sculpt and mold a faceless haunted puppet, and that was like a career high for me. Like, that's pretty great.
That's awesome. What about you, Jen? Was there one like that you're like, that you like, you see it come to life and you're like, I'm so stoked for this?
Well, I think, one of my favorite books, or two of my favorite books, are these figures are Hidden Staircase and Old Attic. So that was cool to me to see those made, just because I love those books. And I didn't really think I would at the time, because I'm going to show this again. This was never one of my favorite Nancy Drew books. I liked it, okay. But seeing the robot figure come to life, I think that one's kind of cool. So it's become a favorite of mine too. So, yeah.
I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, since I have you on, Jen. If someone is, listening to this podcast or watching the video and they've never dove into the world of Nancy Drew, where would you start them off at?
Yeah, that they've been living under a rock. No, I'm just kidding. So I would suggest, starting with the books. You don't really have to read them in order, but I'm a person that reads things in order. So start with the first several books, immerse yourself that way. If you really want to get retro, go find the original versions, because they revised them starting in the 50s.
Okay.
So the original versions of the first 34 have 25 chapters. The revised versions have 20. So that's a way to kind of figure that out. But yeah, dive into the books. They can go to my website, nancydrewsleuth.com, and you can find all different aspects of Nancy on there, from the vintage to the modern. Learn about her history behind the books and people that created her, collectibles, collecting tips, how to decipher what year or decade your book is from. I have a whole format section. So you can really learn a lot there. If you just want to get just a taste of Nancy Drew, you can kind of get an overview there.
Nice. And then Doc, I know you said your wife had these books sitting out. Have you gone back now since doing this project and diving back into some of these stories and going, oh my goodness, or has it just been not yet at that time?
No, I definitely I reread and read the ones I hadn't read, every book that we based a figure on, and
Okay.
then I read a bunch others, and yeah, I have to say I'm a bigger Nancy Drew fan than when we started, because I've been really kind of reading a lot and enjoying it, and like going down side quests to find really like the Dana girls, and like who are well, it's a long story, but there's like Judy Bolton. I found some weird stuff once I opened the door that I love it all. But no, like in particular, I one of the first ones I reread when we started this project was Lilac Inn, the one with the ghost Nancy on the cover. And it's just a good story. I mean, it is just good. Like it goes to these crazy play. At one point, there's a river-based submarine. I mean, it goes to some weird places,
A
but
bomb.
yeah, yeah, there's a bitter actress with a who's a master of disguise. I mean, it's it's some wild stuff, but they're just good stories about an interesting character who cares about other people, and who every once in a while winds up kidnapped in a submarine. You know what I mean? And it's not, by the way, the only time she got kidnapped in a submarine, because Crocodile Island, she winds up in a submarine too. I don't know. She winds up in a lot of submarines, I guess. Well, at least two that I know of.
It's well, this has been so much fun to kind of explore because again, like I said, I I'm the person that's been living under the rock. I knew of Nancy Drew from the Hardy Boys, like that was my knowledge. And I know some of the shenanigans that the Hardy Boys got put into, so I can
Yeah.
imagine.
Well, I'm like you. I started my Nancy Drew path as a kid in the '80s on Hardy Boys
Yeah.
books, and then she showed up in some of them in those later paperbacks, and that's when I asked my mom who Nancy Drew was. She's like, "Who's Nancy Drew?" Like, that's when I transitioned over.
Yeah. That's so neat to see. I'm sure, as the campaign, like you said, it's already funded. You've got some stretch goals. These figures, they look so good. Like, and you guys will have been seeing these because on when I post this video, it'll be edited and there'll be some cool pictures popping up of the figures that we're talking about and things like that. Um,
Wonderful.
so, but man, they're beautiful. They are really well done. What's, what can you tell me about the process of creating an action figure?
Well, you start with the sculpt. So the first step is the sculptor. Well, I guess it depends on, for us who we're using existing art, right? Like
Yeah.
this line is based on the cover art from the Nancy Drew books. So we already had concepts. So we didn't need original concepts. But starting with that concept, our first stop was the sculptor. And the sculptor, we work with the sculptor to sort of craft the different details. And then the next stop is, from there, you need a really good factory. We have a factory in China, and the factory kind of explodes the sculpt and it builds in the articulation, like whether that's going to be a sonic weld, whether that's going to be like T-joint, like how you put the figure together, right? And so that sculpture gets refined by some technical changes by the factory. Then we have to create what the tooling or the molds, right? So this means the negative space that the plastic's going to be poured into to create the separate pieces. The molding and tooling is the most arduous, most expensive, and sort of longest part of the process, right? But once you've got those molds, then you do what's called a test shot, where you inject the plastic in for the first time. This is the first time the mold has ever touched plastic, and you get those test shots, and that you can get to check the articulation.
Mm.
You get to check like the fidelity of the mold. Then is a paint master. So like, even though the plastic will be molded certain colors, we've got all the paint applications. You got to do a paint master. And in our case, we started making action figures during the pandemic. Sometimes that means factory visits to China. In our case, it meant FedExing, and it was the pandemic and everything was happening. And then once the paint, they create these things called paint masks to do the paint
Yeah,
applications. And then at that point, you do a test run, and then you go to town and you manufacture.
that's so cool. I love the behind the scenes. I love the behind the scenes of how the stuff gets made. I love the behind the scenes of, how it came about of getting Simon Schuster to, sign off on things. And so, as I try to wrap it up here with our time frame to be respectful of both your times. Is there anything about Nancy Drew or the Kickstarter that we haven't touched on yet that you're like, ooh, this is something we should know?
Well, we did just unlock a stretch goal that is an accessory pack. So that's now available, or well, it'll be up by tomorrow because we just unlocked it today.
Oh, cool.
But it's a bunch of detective, the little hanging bag of detective accessories, binoculars, and stuff like that. That notebook and stuff that you can will be hand props for your Nancy figures. So
That's so
stretch goal unlocked.
nice.
Yeah, and I think just for fans listening that want to get some of these figures, they
Yeah.
also should know that there's just a few things that you could only get in this Kickstarter. Like there's the silhouette figure, there's the novella, and then the T-shirt that you get with like the all-in tier. You can get with this. So if fans want those particular items, now is the time to get them. Oh, sorry, technical difficulties.
No problem.
So basically, this is the time to get those things if you really want like all of the goodies.
Nice. Yeah, I highly recommend, like, if you're still listening to this and watching this podcast, obviously you are either hooked on the concept or you're a huge Nancy Drew fan. So go check out this Kickstarter. When's the Kickstarter end?
We got 14 more days.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, so go check this out for sure. Thank you both just for taking some time to talk about this with me. Doc, Jenn, where can people find you? What you're doing? I know, you guys are in both different realms of kind of, the world of action figures and the world of Nancy Drew that has beautifully merged together. But, what else are you guys, got going on, and where can people follow you?
Well, I'm on Twitter at Otherland71, and I am my writing partner and I have a new TV show coming out June 1st on Netflix called Ninjago Dragons Rising. So that will be dropping on Netflix June 1st.
Awesome. Very cool.
That's cool. That is cool. So you can find me at my website, nancydrewsleuth.com. You can find our fan group at nancydrewfans.com. And then we're pretty much on, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm at Nancy Drew Expert on Twitter and Instagram. And then there's at Nancy Drew Fans and at Nancy Drew Sleuth for the fan group. So yeah, and on the main websites, you can find links to all of our social media too. So.
Awesome. And all the links to the Kickstarter and, both the links that Jenn and Doc have mentioned are going to be in the description of this video. And also, if you're listening via the podcast, it'll be in the description of wherever you get your podcast from. I'm excited for y'all. This is such a cool Kickstarter. This was a blast talking about it and getting to expand my knowledge of Nancy Drew. And I feel like I got to go to Half Price Bookstore now and pick up something. Because
yeah, that's a fun bookstore to go to. Yeah,
I guess I realized I said Half Price Bookstore. I'm like, oh, it's probably a Midwest thing that like there probably isn't everywhere else. But it's a secondhand bookstore, which I really like.
Yeah, they have like a vintage section and they've got the regular kids section. So I always shop both. They have some out here in Arizona, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I have fun going there.
Nice. So, well, gang, again, thank you both just so much for taking some time out of your busy schedules to talk about this awesome Kickstarter with me. Go check out the Kickstarter, gang, support it. But with that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out.
All right. That's awesome.